9/11, the biggest news of the 21st century. This one day changed the lives of Muslims all over the world forever. On one side there was America, the world's biggest superpower, and on the other side was one man, Osama bin Laden, the most wanted terrorist at the time. He took the lives of thousands of people. This wasn't the first time someone tried to bring these two towers down. These twin towers were among the tallest buildings in the world at that time. And of course these buildings were the most famous buildings in the world because nearly 500 Hollywood movies were filmed in and around this building. So whoever wanted to bring down these buildings knew very well that when these World Trade Center buildings fell in New York, it would be the biggest news in the world. It'd be like if someone were to bring down the Burj Khalifa today. Just 23 years ago, the world was in a state where the Soviet Union had collapsed and China wasn't powerful enough at that time. So America was the one and only superpower in the world, and there was no one in the world to challenge its power. It was just a normal day, September 11, 2001. 19 men arrived at different airports to hijack 4 large American airplanes. Looking at all the reports from America so far, it seems that all 19 of these men were Muslim, and they were all from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Lebanon, and the UAE. Teams of 5 people were formed to hijack each plane, with each person having a very important role, and they had been training for this for the past several months. So finally, these 4 planes departed from their airports and as soon as these planes took off, these guys started their plan to hijack the planes. According to the plan, just 15 minutes after takeoff, the 5 hijackers on the first plane stood up and very quickly hijacked the entire plane with some small knives and box cutters. They killed both the pilots of the plane, put their own guy, Mohammed Atta, in the pilot's seat, and pushed all the passengers to the back. And they clearly told everyone that now that both pilots of the plane are dead, only our guy, Mohammed Atta, can land this plane. So all the passengers stood there quietly, but the hijackers never wanted to land this plane. Now, while the new pilot of this plane, Mohammed Atta, was explaining these things to the passengers, he accidentally pressed another button on the plane which connected him directly to the New York airport tower. He said, "Squawk and you'll be okay, tongue to the airport. Everyone sit down, we're taking this plane to the airport." Hearing this, confusion spread at the New York airport, and they quickly cleared the runway by moving all the planes and waited for this plane. After this, Mohammed Atta accidentally connected with the airport tower again and said something. I mean, how can someone be so relaxed in such a dangerous mission? Well, this plane was initially going from Boston to Los Angeles, which is a pretty long trip. So Mohammed Atta turned the plane 100 degrees and started heading towards New York. And as he got close to New York City, the plane started descending very rapidly. And it seemed obvious to everyone that the plane was coming down to land at the New York airport. That's why everyone at the airport was waiting for this plane. But even after a long time, the plane didn't arrive, and everyone at the airport was confused about where the plane had gone. Then finally someone came and told them that the plane had crashed into the World Trade Center building. Now only the airport staff knew what had actually happened, but the American media didn't know anything about it. So every news channel started broadcasting it as a huge accident. During all of this, US President George Bush was at a school with children in Florida. So his secretary came and quietly told him about the incident. So his first reaction was also that it must be an accident. The first plane was hijacked just 15 minutes after takeoff. But the second plane, just like the first, was hijacked 30 minutes later. And these hijacking times were pre-planned, meaning whoever was behind these attacks wanted the whole world to see the second plane crash. Marwan al-Shehi, only 23 years old, along with his companions, hijacked the second plane and took the pilot's seat. And again, the plane was turned towards New York instead of Los Angeles. Now, while news channels worldwide interrupted their regular programs to show the first plane crash, calling it a huge accident, at that very moment, the second plane crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center at full speed in front of the entire world. At first, people were a little confused, but then slowly everyone understood that this was not an accident, but an attack. And again, the American president's secretary came and whispered in his ear and said, "Mr. President, America is under attack." After this, the US Army went on full high alert and all planes in the country were ordered to land. But there were still 2 planes that had been hijacked and no one knew what the next target of these 2 planes would be. The plane, flown by a Saudi citizen named Hani Hanjour, instead of turning towards New York, he turned it towards America's capital, Washington, and as he got closer to Washington, he brought the plane very low and increased the plane's speed to full throttle, and this plane was rapidly heading towards one of the most important buildings in the world, the Pentagon, and the world's #1 intelligence agency, the CIA headquarters. After this plane crashed into the Pentagon, the whole world started showing clips of the Pentagon, leaving aside the World Trade Center. But one plane was still missing. When the US Army checked the direction of this plane, they saw that this plane was also heading towards Washington. And it was possible that it might target America's Parliament, the Capitol. So, reluctantly, on the orders of the Vice President of America, 2 fighter jets were dispatched at full speed to shoot down this plane. And these jets were ordered to shoot down this plane at any cost, even if all the passengers died. 3 planes had reached their targets exactly according to plan. But the 4th plane, which Ziad Jarrah was flying, never reached its target, the capital. By the time this plane was hijacked, the World Trade Center had already been attacked. Ziad Jarrah told all the passengers again to sit down and relax, that they were just going back to the airport. But when one of the passengers contacted his wife using the plane's phone, she told him the hijackers were lying and they weren't going to the airport. This was a suicide mission. This guy went and told the other passengers, "Look, we're going to die anyway." But before these hijackers crashed this plane Pause by Inchi Dindring will bring it down ourselves. At that point, all the passengers together attacked the hijackers. Seeing this, Zia Jara started shaking the plane up and down and side to side. But after trying very hard, the passengers finally reached the cockpit door. And just as they were about to break down the door, the pilot, Zia Jara, increased the plane's speed to full throttle, and he pointed it towards the ground. And that's how the fourth and final plane crashed. Now, news channels all over the world were again showing the fourth plane. Then suddenly, just an hour later, the South Tower of the World Trade Center in New York collapsed. 1,000 people died, and shortly after that, the second tower also fell, and 1,600 people died in that too. Overall, 3,000 people were killed in these 4 9/11 attacks, out of which 200 people died just because they jumped from the top floor of the World Trade Center because of the fire. But a few That same day, Mohammed Atta, the leader of this whole plan, his mother's interview came out where she refused to believe any of it and blamed everything on Israel's intelligence agency, Mossad. She said that Islam doesn't allow such attacks. The parents of the pilots of the third and fourth planes also refused to believe the American reports. And if you look at the families of these attackers, they weren't ordinary poor people. In fact, all these attackers came from very well-off, rich families. The 9/11 attack was so massive that there was dust everywhere in New York for 100 days after the attack. And it cost almost $9 billion just to clean up the debris from these destroyed buildings. But still, the collapse of the World Trade Center wasn't the biggest loss for America. The real damage happened in another building a short distance away, which people always forget. And that building was the New York Stock Exchange. The market got absolutely hammered after these attacks. Panic spread in the American markets, and the American Stock Exchange started to crash. And almost every country's stock started falling. Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway, suffered the biggest loss. It is said that America lost $1.4 trillion because of these attacks. And America's GDP, which was growing at 4% to 5% before, fell below 1% after the 2001 attacks. But now, while the stocks of all companies were falling in the stock exchange, some companies actually profited a lot from these attacks instead of losing money. And the shares of these companies started going up. And these companies were war companies, gun manufacturers, fighter jet and tank manufacturers. Almost all American investors started investing their money in these companies. And why were they doing this? Because everyone knew that America would now start a huge war to avenge 9/11. Because of this, the whole world was watching American President George Bush closely, wondering who and why dared to do such a thing to the world's biggest superpower, America, and all of America was filled with anger. A few days after these attacks, George Bush finally came before the whole world and told everyone that there was no country or government behind these attacks. Rather, it was a terrorist attack. And behind these attacks, there was only one organization, Al-Qaeda, including, among others, its leader, Osama bin Laden, who was sitting peacefully in Afghanistan, far away from all this. Now, when the whole world was blaming Osama bin Laden for these attacks, Osama bin Laden came forward and gave an interview to Al Jazeera, saying that he had nothing to do with these attacks. But he also made some other statements that left the whole world confused as to whether he did it or not. After these attacks, not only Osama, but Muslims and scholars from all over the world came forward and strongly condemned these attacks. Because if anyone has read about the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he would know that before every battle, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to give these orders to the Muslims that even during the war, no woman, child, old person, or even trees should be cut down, and not to kill farmers and priests of other religions. Fight only those who fight you. Meaning, how could anyone do such a thing in the name of the religion of such a soft-spoken and always forgiving Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? That is why, after these attacks, the OIC, the largest organization of Muslims, came forward and condemned these 9/11 attacks. And besides them, the Grand Mufti of Mecca also issued a statement that these attacks are against Islam. And even Ayatollah Khamenei, who is considered an enemy of America, also issued a statement that these attacks have nothing to do with Islam. But despite all this, the image of Islam in Western countries began to deteriorate and Islamophobia began to rise. For example, people started killing women wearing hijabs on the road, and many Muslims in Western countries were fired from their jobs, and some Muslims were even killed. And for the first time on TV, this debate started whether Islam is even a peaceful religion or not. Islam is a religion of peace. But despite all these things, the sentiment of Muslims all over the world was that whoever carried out these attacks, we are against all of this. Now, even after Osama bin Laden's denial, America put all the blame on Osama bin Laden. America gave an ultimatum to the Afghan government, the Taliban, that all Al-Qaeda leaders, including Osama bin Laden, should be handed over to America at any cost. But Afghanistan did not do so because Afghanistan had defeated a very big superpower, the Soviet Union, just a few years ago after 10 years of war. And Osama bin Laden played a very big role in helping Afghanistan in that war, because of which the Taliban government, whose leader was Mullah Muhammad Omar, used to respect Osama bin Laden very much, on which the Taliban told the American government that the person you are blaming is not even admitting that he did all this. You give us proof, we will punish him ourselves, and we cannot hand over our guest to anyone without proof. But America did not accept their offer and said, look, I am a superpower and you are an ordinary poor country. I don't need to give you any proof. Just hand this man over to me, or else we will attack Afghanistan and destroy the Taliban, because the generals of America had already done the research that the Taliban could only stand against us for a few weeks. After that, we will finish them. But the Taliban, being Pashtuns, of course, did not listen to them. So America also started planning to attack Afghanistan. To stop this war, the Taliban made one last attempt and told America that we will hand over Osama bin Laden to a third country that neither listens to you nor us, and they will decide independently. But America was drunk on its power and did not accept this offer of Afghanistan either. And just 1 month after 9/11, they attacked Afghanistan. George Bush called this war a crusade and named it the War on Terror. This crusade, this war on terrorism, and from all sides, they started sending their troops towards Afghanistan. And inside Afghanistan, the most powerful Afghan against the Taliban was Ahmad Shah Massoud. America fully supported his army. And exactly according to America's plan, they drove out the Taliban and conquered all of Afghanistan. But while doing all this, America faced a big hurdle, the media, and especially Al Jazeera. America's side was being shown, but Al Jazeera was the only channel showing both sides, the American side and the Afghan side. Al Jazeera showed on their TV at a time when American jets were targeting not just the Taliban, but also civilians, which other channels like BBC, CNN, etc. were not showing until now. So the American army got very angry about this, and just 4 weeks after the attack on Afghanistan, they blew up Al Jazeera's headquarters in Kabul with one of their planes so that Al Jazeera could not report from there, and they even sent their cameraman to the world's most dangerous prison, Guantanamo Bay, so that Al Jazeera's voice could be silenced by all these things. The American general's planning was absolutely correct, because just 3 months after 9/11, the Taliban government in Afghanistan was finished, after which there was no leader of Afghanistan. That's why America started searching for a new leader for Afghanistan and held a very big conference in the German city of Bonn, in which they also invited some Afghan leaders. And after seating all of them, they chose a new leader for Afghanistan from Germany, Hamid Karzai, who was the complete opposite of the Taliban, unfulfilled. Music seemed like a regular guy and was the CIA's favorite. America made Hamid Karzai the new president of Afghanistan and trained a new army to strengthen his government and formed a new government. Removing other governments and installing a government of their choice is America's old business. But if you look at the history of Afghanistan, they have never accepted a leader from outside. And to top that, Hamid Karzai's government was so corrupt that the Afghan people couldn't even accept him. Everything continued like this, and it seemed that the Taliban had clearly lost this war. But 2 years later, in 2003, America started a new war, the Iraq War. Saddam Hussein, and he must leave Iraq within 48 hours. Which shifted all of America's focus from Afghanistan to Iraq, where they told a very big lie to remove Saddam Hussein, which they themselves believe today. Well, we will explain the story of Saddam Hussein in another video. When America's focus shifted from Afghanistan, then slowly, under Mullah Omar's leadership, the Taliban started regrouping and launching small attacks on American forces. Saddam Hussein's rule ended in Iraq, but America made huge mistakes in that war, mistakes that were impossible to hide. For example, some pictures were released from an American prison in Iraq, showing American forces treating Iraqis very badly. And these pictures spread all over the world's media, which really damaged America's image. And over in Afghanistan, the Taliban used these images to try and convince Afghans, look, this is what happens in American prisons. Because of these atrocities in Iraq, when Bush visited Iraq, shoes were thrown at him. All of this hurt America's image, not just in Iraq, but also in Afghanistan, and the Taliban started getting stronger again. Another reason for the Taliban's strength was that Afghanistan is a very tribal society, and whenever American troops killed an Afghan, their entire family and tribe would join the Taliban. So instead of weakening the Taliban, killing Afghans made them stronger, and their numbers grew much larger than before. Now, as we said before this, Osama bin Laden had denied being involved in the 9/11 attack. But before the 2004 US elections, a video of Osama bin Laden surfaced where he addressed Americans and took full responsibility for 9/11. And in this video, Osama bin Laden also prayed for the 19 people who carried out 9/11, and America received a warning that he could do it again. So Osama bin Laden took full responsibility for 9/11 3 years later. After this speech, George Bush regained strength in American politics and won the election a short time later. And after winning the election, he sent troops back to Afghanistan after Osama bin Laden. But still, for the next 4 years, neither Osama bin Laden could be found, nor could Afghanistan be conquered, nor could the Taliban be eliminated. This war in Afghanistan, which was supposed to last only a few weeks, continued for 10 years after 9/11. And now, after George Bush, America had a new president, Barack Obama. Instead of reducing this war as he had promised, Obama escalated it upon arrival and sent even more troops to Afghanistan, increasing the number of American troops there to over 100,000. And at the same time, Obama also increased drone attacks and airstrikes. And under his rule, finally, 10 years after 9/11, in 2011, America finally we got a lead on Osama bin Laden. He wasn't hiding in Afghanistan, but in Pakistan. Now, there are two versions of this story. One is from America and Pakistan, and the other is from some senior journalists. Osama bin Laden had been living in Abbottabad, Pakistan for many years with his 3 wives, children, and grandchildren. America carried out an operation on their own, found him, and killed him. The Pakistani army and government were completely unaware, but according to some senior journalists like Seymour Hirsch, the US had offered a $25 million reward for bin Laden's capture, so a retired Pakistani army colonel, Iqbal Saeed Khan, gave bin Laden's location to the CIA for the money. To confirm this information, the US started a fake vaccination campaign with Shakil Afridi in Abbottabad and began scanning the house from all sides. American drones and satellites also started recording the house 24 hours a day. And suddenly, one day, they saw a 6-foot-tall man walking in the lawn of the house. From this and other things, America guessed that it might be Osama bin Laden. Before the attack on Osama, the CIA sent some Pakistani agents near the house. who cut down all the trees so that American helicopters could land easily. And finally, on May 2, 2011, on President Obama's orders, 2 helicopters left Jalalabad, Afghanistan at night to kill Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad without the Pakistani army knowing. Back in America, Obama and his ministers were watching everything live. These helicopters landed at Osama bin Laden's house, and after just a 40-minute operation, Osama bin Laden was killed. They took his body back to Afghanistan, where a DNA test confirmed that it was indeed Osama bin Laden. And then, after taking pictures of his dead body, they threw Osama bin Laden's corpse into the sea. According to the American army, they threw his body into the sea and didn't bury it on land, so that no one would build a huge shrine at his grave later. The CIA sent pictures of Osama bin Laden's corpse to US President Obama, but he refused to release them. Many people in Pakistan still don't believe that Osama bin Laden was in Abbottabad and say it's some big game or conspiracy. But this is completely false, because a few days after the Abbottabad operation, Al-Qaeda accepted Osama bin Laden's death on their secret websites and said they would take revenge. After which the Taliban also accepted his death, and even Osama bin Laden's own son, Hamza bin Laden, confirmed it. So when both America and Al-Qaeda agree on this, what's the problem with Pakistanis? Now, Osama bin Laden had 11 sons from his 5 wives, and his eldest son, Abdullah bin Laden, still quietly runs his business in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. But the Saudi government carefully monitors his every move. Osama bin Laden's second son, Omar bin Laden, publicly denounces his father and his mission, and has even written a book against his father, Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden's third son, Saad bin Laden, was once his father's right-hand man, and Osama wanted to make him the new leader of Al-Qaeda after him. But this son, Saad bin Laden, was killed in 2009 before Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden had only one son, his fourth son, Hamza bin Laden, who was among the leaders of Al-Qaeda after him, and after Osama bin Laden's death, he frequently gave public statements on behalf of Al-Qaeda, but he too was killed in Afghanistan between 2018 and 2019. The remaining members of Osama bin Laden's family in Abbottabad were imprisoned in Pakistan for a couple of years before being sent back to their countries. And today, they are all living quietly in Saudi Arabia and Yemen, but no one knows their exact location. Many personal documents were also found in Osama bin Laden's house after his death, including some recordings and video games for his children. Looking at these documents, it seems that Osama bin Laden knew beforehand that one day he would be killed suddenly like this. Therefore, one of these documents contains his last will, in which he writes that he still has $40 million, and after his death, only a small portion should be given to his family, and the rest should be given to Al-Qaeda. Now, when Osama bin Laden was killed and America had accomplished what it came to Afghanistan for, they should have left Afghanistan and gone back, but they didn't do that, and they stayed in Afghanistan for the next 10 years because Osama bin Laden was no longer an issue, but the world had completely changed. And very close to Afghanistan, a new superpower, China, was about to emerge. And to keep China in check, America's presence in this region was essential. Apart from this, Shortly before Osama bin Laden's death, an American institute conducted research in Afghanistan, and they found out that the minerals found beneath Afghanistan's soil are among the most precious and rare minerals in the world. The most important of these minerals is lithium, which is used to make almost all batteries in the world. Now, if America had left Afghanistan, China could have very easily accessed these minerals. That's why America stayed in Afghanistan for the next 10 years. But despite America's immense power and large army, the Taliban's presence in Afghanistan continued to grow. And finally, after 20 years of war, America's new president, Donald Trump, was forced to make a deal with the Taliban government. And he started slowly withdrawing his troops from Afghanistan. And despite 20 years of training, the Afghan army couldn't even stand up to the Taliban for a few days. And within a few days of America's departure, the Taliban entered their capital, Kabul, once again after 20 years without any fight. This war in Afghanistan is considered America's biggest failure because even after 20 years of fighting, America, instead of weakening the Taliban, made them stronger. And after this war, Afghanistan regained its title as the Grave. The Great Game, friends, after the tragic loss of 3,000 American lives in 9/11, the subsequent global war on terror has claimed a staggering 4.6 million lives. That's 46 lakh people. A heartbreaking 4 crore people have been displaced from their homes, becoming refugees. I, myself, along with my family and entire city, experienced life as a refugee in 2009. Even though I had no direct connection to 9/11, if we analyze the cost of this war on terror, the direct expenses amount to a massive $2 trillion. And according to estimates by Brown University, the war on terror has cost America a staggering $8 trillion. This war on terror has inflicted pain and suffering on both the American people and the people of Afghanistan. The only beneficiaries of this conflict have been the companies that manufacture weapons. For instance, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, who earned millions of dollars annually before this war, saw his income skyrocket from millions to $30 million during the war. This translates to a 10-fold increase in income within a few short years, and even today,